His hand gripped her wrist gently at first, then pulled her firmly so that she tumbled into his arms, her back pressed hard against the hotel room door, a door that now shut out every sound of the city. Illyra's breath came in rapid bursts, her chest rising and falling beneath the uniform shirt that hadn't yet been fully unbuttoned. The hem of her blouse was pushed up by Adrian's insistent hands, his hot fingers sliding over her sensitive skin, leaving a trail of red marks along her spine. His lips brushed her ear, whispering her name in a deep, roughened voice, thick with longing that had been pent up for far too long. Illyra bit her lips softly, eyes fluttering shut, her whole body trembling, partly from desire, partly from the sharp thrill of being caught. The room glowed with a dim light, their shadows tangled on the wall as if the world outside had never existed. Each breath, each rustle of fabric against skin seemed magnified in this closed space, mingling with the frantic rhythm of their hearts. Never before had Illyra felt so achingly alive, every rule, every boundary, every professional oath dissolving in the heat of Adrian's body pressed to hers. She heard the quiet rasp as his belt slipped free, felt his fingers tracing down to the edge of her uniform skirt, tugging just enough to rip away the last fragile defenses she had left. "Illyra, there won't be another chance. I want you right now." That single sentence was enough to make her forget every risk, every line that should not be crossed. She arched toward him, searching for his breath, his lips, the wildness that could only be born between two people who know they are crossing the final forbidden line. Soft moans, half-spoken words, the muted thud of the door blown shut by the wind, all blended together behind her. Illyra couldn't tell who was leading whom anymore. She only knew that as Adrian's hands slid beneath her thighs and lifted her up, her legs wrapping instinctively around his hips, every reality of duty, title, or future lost all meaning. In that moment, everything burned, evaporating into the thick scent of lust and perfume on heated skin, a fragrance that would linger long after the night was over. Yet only hours before, Illyra had been the model of composure. A senior flight attendant walking through the business class cabin beneath gentle lights, never once imagining that she would surrender control so completely, right there, still dressed in that very uniform. Illyra Voss had never been fond of red-eye flights, even though the sky had always felt like a second home to her. Tonight, the Airbus A350 sliced silently through the dense darkness above Europe. Gentle lights spilled across the business class cabin, where passengers quietly sipped their wine, occasionally exchanging polite, knowing smiles. The clock crept toward midnight, and it seemed as if time itself had paused inside the cabin, with only the soft purr of the engines and the hushed footsteps of the crew breaking the stillness. Illyra moved down the aisle, her figure graceful in a deep blue uniform, the fitted skirt gliding over her long legs. Her soft brown hair was pinned up, bearing a delicate, pale nape. Her face was composed, her gaze sharp yet, for those perceptive enough, hiding a tenderness beneath. To passengers, she was the model of discretion and poise. To her colleagues, she was always serious, sometimes even a bit distant. Tonight, she expected everything to unfold as it always had, until the moment he appeared. The business cabin door swung open, and the quiet click of suitcase wheels glided over the thick carpet. Adrian Lysander entered beneath the dim cabin lights. A tall, broad-shouldered man, his black hair tousled as if he'd just come in from a Parisian rain. A dark suit, tie loosened, and those stormy blue-gray eyes. Cold, confident, and unreadable, yet glinting with something magnetic. Elara noticed the latecomer, quickly straightening her posture and offering a courteous smile. "Good evening, sir. I'm Elara Voss, the chief attendant on this flight. May I see your boarding pass, please?" Adrian handed it over, his eyes never leaving her face. There was something in that gaze, an attention that went beyond the usual pleasantries, as if he were reading each hidden thought she tried to mask. When her hand brushed his as she took the card, a faint jolt shot down her spine, a tingling that lingered. She withdrew her hand swiftly, schooling her features, but a faint blush colored her cheeks for an instant. Adrian settled into seat 2A, the first row by the window. Elara showed him how to fasten his seatbelt, careful to maintain the standard professional distance. As she bent to adjust the thin blanket over his lap, Adrian leaned in closer, his voice a low murmur, barely above a whisper. "Looks like it's going to be a long night, doesn't it?" Elara looked up and met those blue-gray eyes, deep, inviting, almost challenging. She gave a small, non-committal smile, evading the question, but her heart unexpectedly skipped a beat. Pulling herself away, she made her rounds, checking on other passengers, making sure everyone was comfortable, but her mind drifted, weightless. Every time she glanced back, she found Adrian's gaze following her every move, stripping away each layer of her composure. When it was time to serve the wine, Elara leaned in to pour into a crystal glass, and Adrian's lips curled into an amused, almost teasing smile. As he handed her the glass, his fingers brushed lightly over the back of her hand. A touch so brief, yet it sent a shiver through her entire body. She managed to keep her voice steady. "Please enjoy, sir. If you need anything at all, I'll be right here." Adrian didn't respond right away. He took a sip, his eyes still locked on hers. "And what if I need something, beyond what this flight allows?" Elara froze, just for a heartbeat, then forced herself to smile politely. "We'll do everything we can, within the rules, sir." Adrian let out a soft laugh, a sound full of mischief, just loud enough for her to hear, while the other passengers paid no mind. His gaze never wavered, as if he had decided not to let her shyness escape. As the night deepened, the business-class cabin was swallowed by darkness and hush. Some passengers had already slipped on their sleep masks, drifting off to dream somewhere above the clouds. Elara checked the galley, gathering her calm, then turned back to see Adrian still awake, his eyes burning in the dark as if waiting for something only he knew was coming. She found an excuse to check the reading light, leaning close to Adrian. He looked up, and their breaths met, just inches apart. For a fleeting moment, Elara could hear her own heartbeat, smell the faint cologne at Adrian's collar mingling with the ghost of coffee on his lips. His voice, hoarse and intimate, reached her ears. "Elara, you fly so much. Do you ever feel lost up here in the sky?" The question stopped her cold, hitting that hidden well of loneliness she'd always kept buried. Her eyes softened, and for an instant, they both seemed to understand what the other was searching for, even if it would only last a single night. But duty still kept Elara hovering at that fragile boundary. She mustered her composure, straightening Adrian's tie, just a routine gesture, but their fingers met again, and this time neither of them pulled away for a long heartbeat. Their eyes lingered, longer than they should have. Elara swallowed, forcing herself to break the gaze, but found it almost impossible to escape the gravity of his presence. "If you need anything else, sir, just let me know." "I'll remember that, Elara." The way he said her name was half promise, half prophecy, a signal that this night was far from over. Elara turned and hurried back to the galley, her legs trembling as if she just dashed through a sudden downpour. Her heart thundered, something inside her awake for the first time in a long, long while. The plane pressed on, slicing through thick clouds beyond the windows. With every passing minute, the air in the cabin grew heavier with unspoken longing. Elara caught her own blurred reflection in the glass, hair a little messy, cheeks flushed, her breath just a little too fast. She wondered if, from that moment, things had already slipped out of her control. A slight shudder of turbulence startled her. Looking back, she saw Adrian's gaze still fixed on her. He raised his glass, tapping it softly, a silent invitation. "I'm waiting for you." Elara drew a deep breath, trying to settle back into her routine, but Adrian's eyes lingered, a streak of fire tracing over her skin, making every movement, every breath feel different hotter. As she passed his seat again, Adrian, whether by accident or intent, brushed his hand lightly against her waist. A touch so brief, yet enough to send a shiver through her, fingers clutching the service tray as if afraid she might fall into his arms if she let go. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Elara knew she was playing the most dangerous game she'd ever risked at 30,000 feet, a game for two, where the prize was pure pleasure and the cost might be everything. Another passenger called for water, and Elara used the excuse to slip away from Adrian's magnetic field. Still, she could feel his eyes burning along her back. In the galley, she pressed her forehead against the cool door of the fridge, her hand unconsciously tracing her hip, reliving the feel of his touch, the scent of skin, the ghost of his breath at her ear. She bit her lip, forcing herself not to give in to fantasies that went far beyond any boundary she'd ever allowed herself to cross. When she returned, Adrian was standing, leaning casually against the seat, waiting for her like a shadow. He murmured just for her, "When everyone's asleep, do you dare come closer, just a little?" Elara froze, her lips suddenly dry, her heart bursting against her ribs. In that moment, the world seemed to freeze, leaving only the two of them, suspended in the sky, where no one could witness, no one could judge, and every limit seemed as thin as mist. The night was only just beginning. The atmosphere in business class shifted into something hushed and dreamlike as midnight slipped by. Outside, clouds streamed thick beneath the moon, and now and then a faint, bluish glow slipped through the window, making everything inside feel more mysterious, half real, half a fantasy. Most passengers had already surrendered to sleep, their breaths even and soft, the reading lights mostly dimmed. This was the hour when every boundary was easiest to blur, when even the slightest touch could echo in the heart like an explosion for those who lived with secrets. Elara glided silently down the aisle, her long legs barely making a sound on the thick carpet. She checked blankets, refilled water, her eyes catching the smallest movement from any passenger. But truthfully, her mind was utterly consumed by Adrian. He was still awake. His gaze seemed stitched to her every breath, pulling Elara ever closer to the line she had always sworn never to cross in all her years as a flight attendant. As Elara bent to check the tray of wine glasses, Adrian subtly shifted closer, nearer than necessary. The masculine scent of his cologne mingled with the rich leather of his jacket, wrapping her in a cloud she could not escape. She felt his eyes travel from the line of her throat, across her collarbone, down to where her fitted blouse hugged the curve of her chest, sending heat blooming beneath her uniform. "You work so carefully," Adrian murmured, his voice a little rough with sleeplessness. "But don't you ever get bored, seeing the same faces, the same flights over and over?" Elara forced a polite smile, but her throat was dry, her answer sounded more like a sigh. Sometimes, but some flights are different. Adrian landed, so close that his warm breath fanned her cheek. She didn't step back, just stood there, pinned to the floor by something electric. For a single moment, just one tilt of the head, and their lips would have met, no way back after that. Elara closed her eyes for a second, reminding herself of the rules. But when she opened them again, she found that deep, burning look in Adrian's eyes where all self-control seemed to flicker and catch. He brushed her hand lightly as she cleared his glass, his fingers warm, firm, and slow to let go. She startled, but instead of pulling away, she let his hand hold hers. Every vein beneath her skin seemed to pulse, her heart pounding wildly. Adrian squeezed gently, drawing her closer, his intention clear. "You always keep everything so safe, Elara. But sometimes, people live for a taste of danger, don't they?" The question needed no answer. Elara felt her defenses growing thinner, as if the cabin itself was losing pressure, every sense sharpened, every emotion ready to ignite at a single touch. At that moment, a quiet chime sounded from the galley, a passenger requesting water. Elara pulled her hand away, hurrying toward the galley, but she could feel Adrian's eyes burning after her with every step, a line of fire along her skin. She filled a glass for the passenger, but her hands trembled, droplets splashing on her chilled knuckles. Catching her reflection in the fridge door's glass, she saw her own flushed cheeks, dreamy eyes, lips trembling. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so vividly, so wildly alive. Returning to the cabin, Elara saw Adrian had taken off his jacket, reclining in his seat, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing strong collarbones and sun-browned skin beneath the crisp fabric. His posture was pure invitation, his whole body radiating that magnetic energy that made Elara want to both flee and fling herself into his arms at once. When she approached, Adrian tipped his chin up, a tiny gesture that pulled her eyes irresistibly to the sharp cut of his jaw, the softness of his mouth. "Could I trouble you for something?" Adrian asked, his voice dropping. "I think my eyes are strained from too much time on my laptop." Elara hesitated, but courtesy would not let her refuse. She leaned in, adjusting the reading light just above his shoulder. Her face was only inches from his neck, their breaths mingling in a single rhythm. As she reached up, Adrian's hand rested at her waist, a feather-light touch, yet it made her whole body shiver as if a current had shot up her spine. "That should be better now," Elara murmured, trying to steady her voice. "Would you like to check the light?" Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned closer, his lips almost grazing her ear, confessing in a whisper, "Everything's perfect. There's just one thing missing." Elara turned, and their lips were a single breath apart. In his eyes burned something irresistible. Gone was the businessman's composure, replaced by pure, raw desire. The narrow space of the business-class cabin froze around them. Every outside sound faded into a faraway echo. She stepped back in haste, clinging to her last shred of control, heart pounding so hard she had to steady herself on the seat. Adrian watched her, a sly smile playing on his lips, his hand slipping slowly from her waist to her hip before letting go, his gaze still following her, patient as a hunter waiting for its prey to come willingly. Elara headed straight for the galley, needing a moment to recover her breath. She glanced at her phone, then at her own blurred reflection, cheeks flushed, lips unsteady, eyes alight with a forbidden thrill she had only ever seen in her most private dreams. She wondered, was she the only one crossing this line, or were they both tangled in a dangerous game? A little while later, Adrian pressed the call button, his voice coming softly over the intercom. "Ilara, could I have a cup of warm water, and perhaps a little conversation about Paris, if you're free?" She brought his water, doing her best to keep her face neutral, but inside she felt a storm of nerves. Adrian invited her to sit beside him, using the excuse of passing the time in conversation. Now the cabin was bathed in dim light, everything shrinking down into their own private universe, like a secret room adrift in the endless night. "Where were you born?" Adrian asked, voice low, almost a whisper. "In the south of France, but I've spent more of my life up here, in the air, than on the ground. And up here, has anyone ever made you want to remember them, just for a single night?" The question pierced straight through Ilara's final defenses. She said nothing, cheeks flushed, eyes dropping. Adrian's large, warm hand covered hers, fingers threading between hers with possessive tenderness. Ilara didn't pull away, nor did she speak. Whatever resistance she had left had been melted by his gravitational pull. The cabin fell silent. Ilara could hear Adrian's breath quickening near her ear, the masculine scent of his body and cologne, the pounding of her own heart. In that instant, nothing separated them but a layer of fabric and a willpower that was rapidly dissolving. Suddenly, a soft sound came from the door, a passenger shifting, the click of a seatbelt. Instantly, Ilara and Adrian let go, returning to their masks of composure. But just a glance was enough for Ilara to know she'd already gone too far and wanted to go further still. The night crept on. High above the black earth, two strangers stood together at a threshold no one else would dare cross, just waiting for the tiniest excuse to ignite everything. Business class was wrapped in a gentle darkness, illuminated only by soft yellow lights running along the floor, painting faint shadows of bodies over the leather seats. Ilara stood at the galley, clutching a cup of hot water, unable to recall when she'd poured it. Her whole body was strung tight, every sense tuned to the breathing of the man behind her. She knew that even the smallest glance would confirm Adrian was still there, reclining in his seat, his gaze never leaving her as she moved. She delivered water to a passenger, exchanged a few polite words, but her attention kept drifting toward Adrian, or, more truthfully, was pulled toward him as if by gravity. When she returned to the front of the cabin, she found Adrian leaning casually against a seat, fingers drifting lightly over his phone. She knew he wasn't waiting for any service. He was waiting for a decision, a signal from her. Adrian snapped his phone closed, slipped it into his pocket. He smiled, stepped fully into the narrow aisle, just a few steps from Ilara. The drone of the engines became a strange sort of music, the soundtrack to a secret dance only they would ever remember. He looked at her, his smile daring, a glint of challenge in his eyes. "Have you ever wondered, if you only had one night, what would you choose just for yourself?" Ilara let out a soft laugh, her voice trembling. "I think I'd try my best not to break the rules." Adrian stepped closer, closing the distance, the warmth of his body and the scent of his cologne filling the small space. He reached out, brushing her chin lightly, lifting it with a gentleness that pinned her with the depth of his gaze. Sometimes, rules are only for people who are afraid to truly live. Ilara didn't answer, but her lips parted slightly, her breath mingling with his, warm against his fingertips. In that moment, she was no longer the careful chief attendant, but a woman standing before a wave of desire, both yearning and terrified. A passenger stirred somewhere down the aisle, Ilara startled, stepping back, returning to her professional mask. Adrian laughed softly, slid back into his seat, but his eyes remained alight, as if he'd left a phantom kiss on her skin. She hurried to the back of the cabin, her heart pounding painfully. Her mind was crowded with images, his hand on her skin, the feeling of being claimed, seen through, exposed completely. Elara pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady herself, but her body still trembled with longing. When she returned, she found a small piece of paper on Adrian's tray, the handwriting bold and clear. Room 1712, Marina Bay Hotel. If you want to. Elara clenched the note tightly, her heart thundering in panic. She knew every rule of her profession. Never accept such invitations, never risk it. Not even once. But a secret part of her trembled with anticipation, like a child tasting freedom for the very first time. Adrian stood up, pretending to adjust his jacket, his eyes never leaving her. As he passed her on the way to the lavatory, he leaned close and whispered, "If you don't come, I still won't forget tonight." Elara was left frozen, fingers digging into the slip of paper until they ached. She fled to the galley, closed the door, leaning against the fridge, eyes stinging, not sure if it was from nerves or from the fear of herself. Time seemed to slow. Elara went through the motions of her work, but every gesture felt like moving through mist. More than once, she let herself pass Adrian's seat, acutely aware of his eyes tracing every curve of her body, from the arch of her back to her waist, hips, thighs. Those fleeting touches, some accidental, others fully deliberate, became bolder, the tension between them unmistakable. In a quiet corner, Adrian took a cold towel, gently drew Elara's hand into his thumb tracing a slow line along the inside of her wrist, setting a line of fire beneath her skin. Elara's breath came short and fast, lips trembling, but she didn't pull away, only tilted her head, letting her hair fall forward to hide her blushing cheeks. "I know you want this too, Elara," Adrian murmured, his deep voice stroking every nerve. "Don't force yourself to be strong." Elara couldn't answer. Her mind felt submerged in fog, where only sensation and instinct mattered. She closed her eyes for a moment, surrendering to his grip, savoring the feeling of being held, being drawn into a forbidden place with no way back. The chime for cabin rest mode sounded. Elara slipped free from his grasp, smoothed her skirt, and walked back to the galley, but her peace was gone. In the tight confines of the cabin, every movement, every touch, now contained the seed of something explosive. She couldn't recall how many times she'd tried to avoid him, how often her heart had pounded from a glance, a brush of fingertips, a whispered word meant for no one else. The cabin darkened further. Passengers sank deeper into sleep, the crew retired to their quarters at the rear. Only Elara remained, standing quietly in the golden light, clutching the slip of paper with the hotel room number. Outside, the sky flowed by, unbroken by even a single cloud, as if all the world's forbidden desires existed only in this flying capsule, between two strangers who wanted, equally, to run and to touch, to give in completely. Inside Elara, the battle reached its peak. She knew that taking even one step further would shatter every boundary, but she also knew that if she didn't, she might never feel this burning, reckless aliveness again. Tonight, above the clouds, every rule faded away, and only one truth remained. They were born to break the boundaries they'd built for themselves. The sound of the plane's engines faded from Elara's mind as the wheels touched down on the runway in Singapore. Passengers left the plane one by one, each carrying with them a personal story from a long night in the sky. But for Alara, tonight, everything was only just beginning. Now, only a few crew members remained in business class, cleaning up. Alara stood still among the seats, memories, glances, and Adrian's touch still buzzing across her skin like lines of fire. Her hand clutched the small slip of paper with the words, Room 1712. A key to another world where there were no rules, no boundaries, only raw instinct and burning desire. In the cruise hotel break room, Alara stood before the mirror for a long time. She undressed from her uniform slowly, each motion deliberate, as if she were peeling off the mask of the professional woman, stripping away every last layer she'd built. Her pale skin gleamed in the soft light, faint red marks on her wrists and arms, the evidence of accidental touches that Adrian had left on her all night. She slipped into a thin silk dress, dabbed perfume lightly behind her ear, her heart racing as if it might leap right out of her chest. The humid, warm Singapore breeze drifted through the window, but nothing could cool the heat rising inside her now. Every step out the door felt like stepping into either a terrible mistake or something that might change her life forever. Standing in front of room 1712, Alara almost trembled from nerves. She knocked softly, and after only a heartbeat, the door opened. Adrian stood there, his white shirt only half-buttoned, hair gently tousled, eyes aflame yet gentle in a way she never expected. Without a word, he reached out, pulling her inside and shutting the door. There was no need for small talk. Adrian's gaze searched for Alara, then he leaned down and kissed her, at first softly, searching, but within seconds all the restraint between them evaporated. Alara answered his kiss, their tongues meeting, his masculine flavor mixing with the sweetness of her lips, burning and drowning them both. Their breaths grew frantic, mingling with the sound of shifting fabric, Adrian's fingers tracing fire down Alara's spine, lifting her dress, pulling her tightly against the hard lines of his body. They stumbled toward the bed, every step a new explosion of sensation. Adrian scooped Alara up, setting her on the high windowsill with the lights of Singapore shimmering behind her. His strong hands circled her waist, caressing every soft curve, lips traveling across her neck, shoulders, breasts. Alara arched her back, moaning softly, desperate sounds escaping as her body twisted under his touch, both surrendering and claiming at once in his embrace. He tugged at her dress straps, silk slipping down to reveal her trembling bare shoulders. His hand cupped her breast, squeezing gently, teasing her heated skin with his fingertips. Alara felt as if she was falling through clouds, weightless, unmoored, nothing left but pleasure and the quickened breaths they shared. Adrian carried her to the bed, laying her down on crisp white sheets. He pulled her dress over her head, mouth gliding down from her collarbone to her belly and lower, every kiss a spark that set her aflame. Alara arched to meet him, hands digging into his shoulders, calling his name in broken cries. Adrian shed his shirt, revealing a toned, bronzed body in perfect contrast to her pale, smooth skin. He pressed over her, mouth and hands and body entwining them until they were lost in each other. Their moans echoed in the closed room, blending with the sounds of bodies colliding, fabric sliding over skin, the soft creak of the mattress. A forbidden symphony played for no one else. Alara lost all sense of herself, knowing only that in this moment, every rule, every line had vanished. She gave herself up completely, crying out as wave after wave of pleasure shook her, her body trembling in Adrian's arms, vision blurred with euphoria. Adrian leaned close to her ear, voice low and hoarse. "You're incredible, Elara. Tonight is ours alone, just this once." Elara wrapped her legs tightly around his hips, drawing him in deeper, biting her lip to muffle the scream building in her throat. The world outside disappeared, leaving only this small room high above the city, two souls desperate for each other, burning every last taboo to ash. When at last they lay quiet together, Elara rested her face on Adrian's chest, listening to the hammer of his heart, feeling the sheen of sweat on his hot skin. She felt like a stranger to herself, newly reborn, fragile, undone, but overflowing with happiness. The marks of his mouth, his teeth, lingered on her shoulder, back, and breasts, secret signs no one else would ever see. Outside, the city still blazed with lights. But here, inside, Elara and Adrian had crossed every frontier of desire, leaving each other with wordless scars, forever their secret, never to be erased. Dawn slowly crept through the thin white curtains of the hotel room, painting Elara's bare skin with golden light as she lay with her head resting on Adrian's chest. The night had passed like a rainstorm, leaving behind a lingering warmth and a sweet aftertaste on every inch of her body, on every red mark still fresh on her neck, shoulders, and back. Elara shifted slightly, burying her face deeper into his strong chest, inhaling the masculine scent, intoxicating, a blend of cologne and skin that still clung together after a sleepless night. Adrian was still awake, his hand gently stroking her brown hair, his gaze quieter now, infinitely softer than the bold, mischievous look he'd worn the night before. They didn't need words, just the hush of their breathing, the beat of their hearts, and that strange, peaceful feeling as if the whole world had been left outside the thick door of this room. "Are you all right?" Adrian asked softly, his fingertips tracing her collarbone, gliding down her neck, stopping at a faint purple bruise left by his lips. Elara smiled gently and nodded, no longer shy or ashamed. Last night, every defense and boundary had been burned away in his arms. She pressed a kiss to his chest and whispered, "I've never felt so alive." Adrian said nothing, only held her closer. After a while, he sat up, leaning against the headboard and pulling Elara into his lap. She wrapped her arms around his neck, their bare bodies tangled beneath the white sheet, a kind of intimacy that felt impossibly natural. Adrian gazed at her for a long time, as if memorizing every line, every expression, every mark and the last tears shining at the corners of her eyes. Elara smiled, reaching up to touch a small scratch on his back, her fingernails souvenir from their night of passion. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice husky. Adrian shook his head slowly, his fingers drawing idle circles on her back. "No, this night it was ours. Maybe things will be different after today, but I want to keep this forever." "What about you?" Elara rested her head on his shoulder, eyes distant. "I know when morning comes, everything will go back to how it was, but I'll never forget this feeling. No one else will ever make me tremble like that, even if it was only for a night." They sat in silence for a long time. Occasionally, Elara pressed a soft kiss to his jaw, to his throat, savoring every last second of this intimacy that could never be repeated. His hand slid down her thigh, squeezing gently, pulling her closer one final time. Even though the climax had passed, their breaths still clung together, hot and intoxicated. "There's something I have to tell you," Adrian finally said, his gaze softening into a kind of gentle sadness. "This morning, I'm leaving Singapore. I'm flying back to London. My next flight is a return to the real world. Back there, I'm a man with a family, with responsibilities, with secrets I can't ever say out loud." Elara was silent. She had sensed it all along, but hearing him say it still cut like a gentle but deep knife. "I understand. I won't ask, I won't judge. I have my own secrets too," she murmured. "I just want to remember you as something beautiful that's only mine, something no one can ever take away." Adrian pulled her close, kissing her deeply and for a long, long moment, as if trying to drown every regret in that one last touch. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his small bag and took out a delicate item, a blue crystal hair clip, sparkling in the first sunlight of morning. "For you to remember," he whispered, pinning it in Elara's hair. Elara, too, left something on his pillow, a thin silver chain, her lucky charm from years of flying, a quiet blessing for the man who had stolen her most beautiful night. Outside the window, Singapore woke up, cars beginning to flow, the noise of the world returning. Inside, Elara and Adrian lay entwined one last time, each breath marking their memories, leaving a scar that could never be erased from either of their hearts. But time always moves on. The alarm finally sounded, reminding them both to return to reality. Elara slipped back into her thin dress, her bare feet padding quietly toward the door, turning once to look at the man still lying there, his eyes both fierce and tender. Adrian took her hand one last time, saying nothing, letting all their feelings speak for themselves. "Goodbye, Adrian. Until we meet again, somewhere in the sky." The door closed behind her. Elara walked down the hotel hallway, heart light yet aching, knowing that the forbidden night would stay with her forever. A sweet wound, an intoxication with no cure, a secret only she and Adrian would ever carry for the rest of their lives. Singapore was still bustling as Elara left the hotel, blending into the crowd as if she were just a fleeting shadow among a sea of strangers. The early morning sunlight filtered through the glass of the subway car, reflecting Elara's image. Her hair pinned up neatly, her deep eyes shimmering with a strange mix of sorrow and radiance. The blue crystal hair clip Adrian had pinned in her hair the night before still glimmered with every tilt of her head, a silent mark of a night no one else would ever know. Back in the crew's rest room, Elara leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for a moment. Images flashed through her mind, Adrian's hand on her skin, that deep farewell kiss, the utter exhaustion and bliss of lying safe in his arms. Every deep breath seemed to bring back the scent of his cologne, the salty tang of sweat, the sound of whispered moans and stolen glances in dim light. The echoes of that night haunted every sense, from the tips of her fingers to the depths of her eyes. Work carried on as if nothing had ever happened. Elara changed back into her uniform, touched up her makeup, and boarded her next flight with her usual composure. But in her eyes, the sky was forever changed. Everywhere she went, every time she glanced out a tiny round window, she saw her own faint reflection entwined with Adrian's, two souls colliding, breaking every boundary of this world for just one night. On nights after that, wherever she was, whenever fatigue threatened, Elara would reach up to touch the hair clip, smiling at her own reflection. It was a memory that belonged to her alone, untouchable, unstealable. Sometimes she would open her jewelry box, gaze at the silver chain she had left with Adrian, and whisper a quiet goodbye, as if he might still be listening somewhere out in the world. For Adrian, the flight back to London was a long stretch of silence. He sat quietly in first class, fingers absent-mindedly brushing the tiny silver chain on his wrist. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elara's gaze, fragile and fierce, afraid yet burning with desire. He remembered every soft moan, every mark left by her lips, every second of their bodies tangled together in the dark and the heat. Adrian returned to his family, his work, endless meetings, endless emails, but nothing was ever quite the same. In his mind, there was always a woman with brown hair, porcelain skin, and lips that once called his name in the lonely dark of a foreign land. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, he would look at the single photo he'd taken from the hotel balcony. Singapore's city lights blurred, a stray lock of hair trailing over white bedsheets, bare feet draped across his leg. It was the only proof that Alara had ever truly existed in his life, not just a dream, not just a beautiful lie. Time passed. Alara kept flying from one city to the next. Adrian traveled the world as before. They never messaged, never wrote, not a single email or call. But both kept for themselves a bittersweet secret, a forbidden night with no escape, no ending, and nothing that could ever erase it. Once, Alara happened to meet a British passenger on a flight from Paris. Something in his eyes seemed familiar, the warmth of his handshake, the way he glanced over his shoulder as he left business class. She smiled softly, fingers tightening around the hair clip on her head, feeling not a trace of regret. The sky remained vast and lonely. But after that fateful night, Alara knew she had truly lived with all her longing, her frailty, and her courage. Somewhere on the other side of the world, there was a man who would always remember her. If only in dreams, if only in fleeting traces of memory, but in a way more real than anything else in his life. Their story in the sky, in that one extraordinary night, would remain forever a silent, unbreakable secret, an indelible mark in the hearts of two people who once dared to cross the forbidden line.